The blood on Beatrice Murphy's hands was still wet when she stumbled into the dusty town of Silver Peak, Nevada, clutching nothing but a worn leather satchel and the clothes on her back. It was July of 1876, and the desert heat beat down mercilessly on the small mining settlement nestled between rocky outcrops that gave the town its name. Beatrice had been running for 3 days straight, her husband's blood still staining the hem of her dress where she had knelt beside his body after the accident at the mine back in Virginia City. Samuel Murphy had been a good man, if not a particularly ambitious one, and his death in the collapsed shaft had left her with nothing but debts, and the unwanted attention of the mine foreman, who thought a widow might be desperate enough to accept his advances. She had proven him wrong with a cast iron skillet to the side of his head before fleeing into the night. Now, standing on the main street of Silver Peak with the afternoon sun turning everything to gold and amber, Beatrice realized she had no plan beyond survival. The town was smaller than she had expected, just a single dusty thoroughfare lined with wooden buildings that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. A saloon, a general store, a livery stable, and what appeared to be a boarding house made up the bulk of the settlement. In the distance, she could see the dark mouths of silver mines dotting the hillsides, the reason this place existed at all. Her stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she had not eaten since yesterday morning. The few coins in her satchel would not last long, and she needed work immediately. The boarding house seemed the most logical place to start, so she smoothed down her travel-stained dress as best she could and crossed the street, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The woman who answered her knock was perhaps 50 years old, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that assessed Beatrice with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen every type of person the West had to offer. "I am looking for work," Beatrice said, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, and I am not afraid of hard labor." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Martha Henderson," she said by way of introduction. "I run this boarding house, and as it happens, I could use some help. My last girl ran off with a prospector 2 weeks ago. You have references." Beatrice hesitated. "I am recently widowed. My husband died in a mining accident in Virginia City. I left rather suddenly and did not think to bring letters of recommendation." Martha studied her for a long moment, taking in the genuine grief in Beatrice's green eyes, the determined set of her jaw, the way she stood straight despite obvious exhaustion. "You look like you have been through hell and back, girl. Come inside. We will talk terms over some coffee and bread." The relief that flooded through Beatrice was so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. She followed Martha into the cool interior of the boarding house, a simple but clean establishment with whitewashed walls and scrubbed wooden floors. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air, and Beatrice's stomach growled again, louder this time. Martha smiled. "Sit. Eat first, then we will discuss business." Over thick slices of bread with butter and strong black coffee, they negotiated. Beatrice would receive room and board plus a small wage in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and helping Martha manage the 6 rooms she rented to miners, cowboys, and the occasional traveling merchant. It was honest work, and Beatrice accepted gratefully, knowing that her circumstances could have been far worse. Her room was small, just large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her few belongings, but it was hers. After Martha left her to settle in, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry for Samuel, for the life they had planned together, for the children they would never have. Then she washed her face, changed into a clean dress from her satchel, and went downstairs to begin her new life. The work was hard but not unpleasant. Martha was a fair employer, and the boarders were mostly respectful men who appreciated clean sheets and hot meals. Beatrice quickly fell into a routine, rising before dawn to start the breakfast fires, preparing meals throughout the day, changing linens, scrubbing floors, and falling into bed each night, too exhausted for the nightmares that lurked at the edges of her consciousness. 3 weeks after her arrival in Silver Peak, everything changed when Quinton Kane rode into town. Beatrice first saw him from the boarding house window as she was dusting the front parlor. He sat astride a rangy buckskin horse, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that brushed his collar beneath a weather-beaten hat. Even from a distance, there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested capability and quiet confidence. He dismounted in front of the livery stable with the easy grace of someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot, and Beatrice found herself watching longer than was strictly proper before forcing her attention back to her dusting. She did not think much more about the stranger until that evening when Martha informed her they would have a new guest for dinner. "Quinton Kane," Martha said, checking her list. "He is taking the room at the end of the hall. Came to work as foreman at the Silver Bell mine. Seems like a decent sort, very polite." Beatrice nodded and returned to stirring the stew she was preparing for the evening meal. She had become accustomed to the revolving door of guests at the boarding house, and one more man was nothing remarkable. Or so she thought until Quinton Kane walked into the dining room that evening and their eyes met across the table. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong features that stopped just short of handsome, marked by sun and wind and hard living. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a warm brown that held intelligence and something else she could not quite name. When Martha introduced them, his handshake was firm but gentle, and he met her gaze with a directness that was neither presumptuous nor shy. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Murphy," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "That stew smells mighty fine." "Thank you, Mr. Kane," she replied, acutely aware that she was blushing for no good reason. She was a widow, for heaven's sake, and this was simply a boarder, nothing more. But as the days turned into weeks, Beatrice found herself increasingly aware of Quinton's presence in the house. He was different from the other boarders, quieter and more considerate. He never left his room in disarray, always thanked her for meals, and had a habit of reading in the evening parlor, often sharing interesting passages aloud if anyone cared to listen. She learned that he had come from Kansas, where his family had a small ranch, and that he had taken the foreman position to save money to buy his own land someday. "I am tired of working for other men," he told her one evening when she brought him coffee as he reviewed mine reports in the parlor. "A man ought to build something of his own, something that will last." "That is a fine dream," Beatrice said, and meant it. She understood the desire for stability, for something permanent in a world that seemed determined to shift beneath your feet. "What about you, Mrs. Murphy?" he asked, looking up from his papers. "What are your dreams?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in a very long time. Samuel had been content with their simple life, never thinking much about the future beyond the next week's wages. "I suppose I never thought I was allowed to dream," she said slowly. "My parents died when I was 16 and I married Samuel a year later. We were just trying to survive, mostly. And now—" She trailed off, not sure how to articulate the strange emptiness she felt, the sense that her life was suspended between what had been and what might be. Quinton nodded, his expression understanding. "Survival is important, but it is not the same as living." His words stayed with her long after she had retired to her room that night. Survival is not the same as living. When had she stopped living and merely started surviving? Had it been when her parents died, or when she married Samuel out of necessity rather than love, or when she fled Virginia City with blood on her hands? The next morning, Quinton appeared at breakfast with his riding boots covered in mine dust and desert sand. "Apologies, Mrs. Murphy," he said, looking genuinely chagrined. "I should have cleaned these before coming inside. The mine kicked up more dust than usual yesterday." "Think nothing of it," Martha said before Beatrice could respond. "But perhaps Mrs. Murphy could give them a proper cleaning for you. She does excellent work with leather." Beatrice saw the hesitation in Quinton's face, the reluctance to ask for additional service beyond what was standard for boarders. "It would be no trouble," she heard herself say. "Bring them to the kitchen after breakfast, and I will have them ready for you by evening." An hour later, Beatrice found herself in the small room off the kitchen that served as a laundry and cleaning area, Quinton's boots before her on the work table. They were good boots, well made but showing the wear of hard use. She fetched clean water, saddle soap and cloths and set to work. There was something meditative about the task, the rhythmic motion of cleaning away the dust and grime, working the soap into the leather, bringing out the rich brown color that had been hidden beneath the desert's pale coating. She found herself thinking about the man who wore these boots, the way he walked with purpose but without arrogance, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her, the careful way he handled everything as though he understood the value of things. She was buffing the boots to a deep shine when Quinton appeared in the doorway, startling her from her reverie. "I did not mean to disturb you," he said. "I just wanted to check if you needed anything." "They are nearly finished," Beatrice replied, holding up one boot to examine her work in the light from the window. "They cleaned up nicely." Quinton stepped closer, and she caught the scent of soap and sun-warmed skin. He had clearly washed up after his shift at the mine, his hair still slightly damp, his shirt fresh. "You do good work," he said, taking the boot from her to examine it. "These look better than when I first bought them." Beatrice felt a flush of pride at the compliment. "My father was a cobbler back in Pennsylvania. I learned from watching him." "Pennsylvania," Quinton repeated. "That is a long way from Nevada." "Sometimes far away is exactly where you need to be," she said quietly. He set the boot down carefully and looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you running from something, Beatrice?" The use of her first name was so natural, so gentle, that she did not think to correct him. "I ran from a man who thought widowhood made me available," she said, surprised by her own honesty. "I left rather forcefully with a cast-iron skillet." To her amazement, Quinton laughed, a warm, genuine sound that transformed his usually serious face. I imagine he regretted his presumption. "I did not stay to find out," Beatrice admitted, finding herself smiling despite the grimness of the memory. "I just ran." "That takes courage," Quinton said seriously. "A lot of women would not have fought back. I did not have much choice. I would rather take my chances in the desert than accept his offer." Quinton picked up the second boot, turning it in his hands as though studying her handiwork gave him an excuse to prolong the conversation. "You know," he said slowly, "I think a person is a lot like a pair of boots. They get scuffed and worn by life, covered in dust and sometimes blood. But with the right care, the right attention, they can be restored, made better than they were, even stronger for all they have been through." Beatrice looked at him sharply, wondering if he was still talking about boots. The expression on his face suggested he was not. "Mr. Kane," she began, but he held up a hand. "Quinton, please. I think we have moved beyond formalities, do not you?" Before she could respond, Martha's voice called from the front of the house. "Mrs. Murphy, we need more wood for the stove." The spell was broken. Beatrice stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they had been standing. "Your boots will be ready within the hour," she said, her voice more formal than she intended. Quinton nodded, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer. "Thank you, Beatrice, for everything." After he left, Beatrice sat down hard on the work stool, her heart racing. What was happening to her? Samuel had been dead less than 2 months, and here she was, responding to another man's attention like some foolish girl. It was inappropriate. It was too soon. It was. It was terrifying because some part of her wanted it. She forced herself to finish the boots, polishing them to a mirror shine that reflected the afternoon light streaming through the window. When Quinton collected them that evening, his smile was like sunshine, warm and bright and completely without guile. "These are perfect," he said. "I am in your debt." "Nonsense, it was just a simple polishing." "Nothing you do is simple, Beatrice," he said quietly. And then he was gone, leaving her standing in the kitchen with her heart pounding and her thoughts in chaos. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed between them. Quinton would find small reasons to seek her out, offering to carry heavy water buckets, helping her hang laundry when the wind made it difficult, fixing a squeaky hinge on the pantry door. They would talk as they worked, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, the small observations about life that people only share when they are beginning to trust one another. Beatrice learned that Quinton had lost his mother to fever when he was 12, that his father had remarried a woman who made it clear she had no use for her husband's son, that he had left home at 17 and had been making his own way ever since. He had worked on ranches throughout Kansas and Colorado, saved every penny he could, and dreamed of the day he could build his own spread somewhere with good grass and clean water. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, how her father's cobbler shop had been the center of her world until cholera took both her parents within days of each other, leaving her alone at 16 with no family and no prospects. Samuel had been a customer, 20 years older than her, kind but uninspiring. She had married him because the alternative was destitution, and she had tried to be a good wife even though her heart had never truly been engaged. "That is a lonely way to live," Quinton said when she confessed this, his voice gentle with understanding. "Being with someone but still alone." "I did not know any different," Beatrice admitted. "And Samuel was not a bad man. He just was not. We just were not." "You were not in love," Quinton finished for her. "No," she said softly. "We were not." They were sitting on the back porch of the boarding house, watching the sunset paint the desert hills in shades of purple and gold. It was October now, and the brutal heat of summer had given way to cooler evenings that made being outside pleasant. Martha had gone to visit a friend, and the other boarders were at the saloon, leaving Beatrice and Quinton alone in the comfortable silence that had grown between them. "Have you ever been in love?" Beatrice asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. Quinton was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant horizon. "I thought I was once," he said finally. "There was a girl back in Kansas, daughter of the ranch owner I worked for. She was pretty and sweet, and I was young and stupid enough to think that was love. But her father made it clear that his daughter would not be marrying a hired hand, and she made it clear she agreed with him. I learned that what I felt was infatuation, not love. Love would have been stronger. Love would have fought." "What is love, then?" Beatrice asked. "If not sweetness and attraction," Quinton turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I think love is when someone sees all your rough edges, all the parts of you that are difficult and damaged and hard to handle, and they do not run away. They stay. They help you smooth those edges, and you do the same for them. It is choosing someone every day, even when it would be easier to walk away. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Beatrice knew she should look away, should make some light comment to break the moment, but she could not move, could not breathe. "Beatrice," Quinton said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving your husband, still finding your feet in this new life. But I need you to know that I see you. Not just a widow, not just a woman who works at a boarding house. I see your strength, your courage, your kindness. I see how hard you work, how you never complain, how you make everyone around you feel valued. And I want you to know that I am here. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I am here." Tears blurred Beatrice's vision. No one had ever spoken to her like this, had ever seen her as anything more than a convenient solution to a problem. To Samuel, she had been a housekeeper and bed warmer. To her parents, before they died, she had been simply their daughter, with no identity beyond that. But Quinton saw her, truly saw her, and the recognition was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I do not know if I know how to be loved," she whispered. "Or how to love, I never learned." Quinton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from hard work, warm and strong. "Then we will learn together," he said. "No rush, no pressure, just two people trying to figure out how to be more than survivors." They sat like that until full darkness fell, hands linked, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Nevada sky. It was not a declaration of love, not yet. But it was a beginning, and for the first time since Samuel's death, Beatrice felt something bloom in her chest that might have been hope. The next morning, Quinton appeared at breakfast with his boots once again dusty from the mine. He caught Beatrice's eye across the dining room and gave her a small, private smile that made her blush into her coffee cup. After the meal, as the other boarders dispersed to their various occupations, Quinton lingered in the doorway to the kitchen. "My boots could use another cleaning," he said, his tone carefully casual. "If you have time, that is." Martha, washing dishes at the sink, made a sound that might have been a laugh disguised as a cough. "Go on then," she said to Beatrice without turning around. "Take care of Mr. Kane's boots. I can handle the dishes." So Beatrice found herself once again in the cleaning room with Quinton's boots, working the saddle soap into the leather with steady, practiced strokes. This time, Quinton did not leave. He leaned against the door frame, watching her work with an expression of quiet contentment. "You do not have to stay," Beatrice said, though she was secretly pleased that he had. "This is not very interesting to watch." "I disagree," Quinton said. "I find it fascinating. The way you care for things, the attention you give even to simple tasks. You could do this quickly, carelessly, and the boots would still be clean. But you take your time, do it properly. Says a lot about a person." "My father used to say that anything worth doing is worth doing well," Beatrice said, buffing out a scuff mark. "Even if no one else notices the difference, you know, and that matters. Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was," Beatrice said, surprised by the pang of grief that still caught her sometimes when she thought of her parents. "I wish you could have met him. I think you would have liked each other." "I wish I could have met him too," Quinton said quietly. "So I could thank him for raising such a remarkable daughter." Beatrice's hand stilled on the boot. "You should not say such things." "Why not? They are true." "Because I do not know how to respond to them. No one has ever said such things to me before." Quinton pushed off from the door frame and crossed to where she sat, kneeling so they were at eye level. "Then let me teach you," he said gently. "When someone gives you a genuine compliment, you look them in the eye and say thank you. That is all. You do not have to deflect or minimize or pretend you do not deserve kindness. You just accept it." Beatrice looked into his warm brown eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome." Quinton reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "There. That was not so hard, was it?" "It was terrifying," Beatrice admitted, but she was smiling. Quinton laughed, standing and offering her his hand to help her up. She took it, and when she was on her feet, he did not immediately let go. They stood there, hands linked, in the small cleaning room with dust motes dancing in the sunlight from the window. "Beatrice," Quinton said, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "I want to court you properly. I know it is soon, and I know people will talk, but I do not care. I have never been good at playing games or pretending I feel differently than I do. I am drawn to you in a way I have never experienced before, and I think you might feel the same. Am I wrong?" Beatrice's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was too fast, too soon, too risky. But her heart, that foolish organ she had tried so hard to protect, was singing a different song entirely. "You are not wrong," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of making another mistake, of choosing wrong again, of losing myself in someone else and forgetting who I am." Quinton squeezed her hand gently. "Then we will make sure that does not happen." "I do not want you to lose yourself, Beatrice. I want you to find yourself, and if you will let me, I would like to be there while you do." Before she could think better of it, before fear could talk her out of it, Beatrice said, "Yes, yes, you can court me." The smile that broke across Quinton's face was like dawn breaking over the mountains, bright and beautiful and full of promise. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you," he said. "I promise you will not regret this." And somehow, despite all her fears and doubts, Beatrice believed him. Word spread quickly through the small town of Silver Peak that the widow Murphy and the mine foreman Kane were courting. The gossips clucked their tongues and whispered that it was too soon, that Beatrice should show more respect for her dead husband, that Quinton must have improper intentions. But Martha Henderson, who had seen enough of life to recognize genuine feeling when she saw it, was firmly supportive. "You ignore those biddies," she told Beatrice as they prepared dinner one evening. "They have nothing better to do than stick their noses in other people's business. Samuel would not have wanted you to mourn forever, and even if he would have, that is not what matters. What matters is what you want, what makes you happy, and that man makes you happy. I have seen you smile more in the past month than in all the time since you arrived here." "It does feel wrong sometimes," Beatrice admitted, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency. "Like I should feel guiltier than I do." "Did you love Samuel?" Beatrice considered the question honestly. "I cared for him. I respected him. I tried to be a good wife. But love? No, I do not think I loved him, and I do not think he loved me. We were companions, nothing more." "Then you have nothing to feel guilty about," Martha said firmly. "Life is too short and too hard out here to turn away from real feeling when you find it. Trust me, I know." There was a story there, Beatrice could tell, but before she could ask, the bell above the front door rang, announcing Quinton's return from the mine. Her heart did a little leap, as it always did now when she knew he was near. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet him. He was dusty and tired, his face marked with the grime of a day underground, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Hello," he said, his voice warm. "How was your day?" "Busy," she replied, resisting the urge to reach up and brush the dust from his cheek. "How was the mine?" "Productive. We hit a good vein of silver today. The owners are pleased." He glanced around, noting that they were alone in the hallway. "I was thinking, if you are not too tired after dinner, perhaps we could take a walk. The evening is pleasant." "I would like that," Beatrice said, feeling a flutter of anticipation. After dinner and cleanup, Beatrice changed into her good dress, a simple blue calico that brought out the green in her eyes, and met Quinton on the front porch. He had cleaned up, his hair still damp from washing, dressed in clean trousers and a shirt that looked like he had ironed it himself. He offered her his arm, and they walked slowly down the main street of Silver Peak as the sun set behind the mountains. At first, they made small talk, commenting on the weather and the town's latest gossip. But as they left the buildings behind and walked out onto the desert path that led to a small rise overlooking the valley, their conversation deepened. "Tell me about your dream," Beatrice said as they climbed the gentle slope. "The ranch you want to build." Quinton's face became animated in a way she had rarely seen. "I want land with water," he said. "A creek or a river, something reliable, good grass for cattle, maybe some horses. A house made of stone so it will last, with a big kitchen and windows that let in plenty of light. Corrals and barns built properly, not just thrown together, something that will stand for generations." "It sounds wonderful," Beatrice said, and meant it. She could picture it clearly, the kind of place that spoke of permanence and care. "What about you?" Quinton asked. "If you could have anything, what would your dream look like?" Beatrice was quiet for a moment, realizing that for the first time in her adult life, she actually had the luxury of dreaming. "I think I would like to be part of building something," she said slowly. "Not just living in someone else's vision, but actually creating something from nothing. A home, a life, something that matters. And I would like children, I think. I always thought I would have them with Samuel, but it never happened. I would like the noise and chaos of a family, the feeling of being needed and loved." They had reached the top of the rise, and Quinton stopped, turning to face her. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and his face was serious as he took both her hands in his. "Beatrice Murphy," he said, his voice steady and sure. "I know we have not been courting long. I know there is much we still do not know about each other, but I want you to understand something. When I look at you, when I think about my future, I do not see those things as separate anymore. My dream and you, they have become the same thing. I want to build that ranch, that home, that life, and I want to build it with you, not for you with you, as partners, as equals." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "Quinton, I feel the same way. It scares me how much I feel for you, how quickly this has happened, but I cannot deny it. When I think about the future now, you are in it. You are the center of it." "Then that is settled," Quinton said, and pulled her into his arms. She went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood like that as the sun disappeared and the first stars appeared. Two people who had been lost finding themselves in each other. When Quinton finally kissed her, it was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Beatrice had been kissed before by Samuel, but those had been perfunctory things, mechanical and emotionless. This was different. This was a question and an answer, a beginning and a homecoming, all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I love you," Quinton said, the words simple and direct. "I know it is fast, but it is true. I love you, Beatrice Murphy." "I love you too," Beatrice replied, and felt something inside her that had been locked tight for years finally open. "I did not know I could feel this way. I did not know it was possible." "We make it possible," Quinton said, touching his forehead to hers. "Together." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and dreams and promises. When they reached the front porch, Quinton kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, until Beatrice felt like she might float away. "I should let you get inside," Quinton said reluctantly. "It is getting late." "Stay a little longer," Beatrice said, not ready to let the evening end. "Just a few more minutes." So they sat on the porch steps, Beatrice leaning against Quinton's shoulder, watching the stars multiply in the clear Nevada sky. They talked about practical things. How much money Quinton had saved, how long it would take to find the right property, what kind of cattle would do best in the desert climate. But beneath the practical talk was the current of something deeper, the recognition that they were planning a future together, that this was real and solid and worth fighting for. "There is one thing I need to tell you," Beatrice said quietly, "about what happened in Virginia City. The mine foreman I hit, his name was Gerald Cortland. I do not know if he is looking for me, but he might be. He was not the kind of man to let something like that go." Quinton's arm tightened around her shoulders. "If he comes here, he will have to go through me." "I will not let anyone hurt you, Beatrice. That is a promise. I do not want you getting into trouble because of me. You let me worry about that. All you need to worry about is being happy. Can you do that?" Beatrice thought about it, about how foreign the concept of happiness had been just a few months ago, and how natural it felt now. "Yes," she said, "I think I can." The winter of 1876 was unusually mild in Silver Peak, with cold nights but sunny days that made outdoor work possible. Quinton continued his job as mine foreman, but he spent every spare moment looking at properties in the surrounding area. On Sundays, when the mine was closed and Beatrice had the afternoon free, they would borrow horses from the livery and ride out to explore potential ranch sites. It was on one of these excursions, in late January of 1877, that they found it. The property was about 10 miles northeast of Silver Peak, tucked into a valley between two ridges of rocky hills. A creek ran through it year-round, fed by springs higher in the mountains, and the valley floor was covered in good grass that had sustained wild horses for generations. There was even a small cabin, rough but serviceable, that had been built by a prospector who gave up and moved on. "This is it," Quinton said, sitting on his horse and surveying the land with the eye of someone who had been dreaming of this moment his whole life. "This is exactly what I have been looking for." Beatrice could see it too, could imagine the house they would build to replace the cabin, the corrals and barns, the cattle grazing peacefully in the valley. "How much?" she asked. "More than I have saved," Quinton admitted, "but not impossibly more. If I keep working at the mine for another 6 months, save every penny, I can make a down payment. The owner is willing to take payments on the rest over time." 6 months, Beatrice repeated. It seemed like both forever and no time at all. Quinton dismounted and helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "I know it is not ideal," he said, "but I want to do this right. I want to be able to support you properly before we marry." Marry? Beatrice's heart skipped a beat. They had talked around the subject but never directly addressed it. Quinton reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "I meant to do this more romantically," he said with a sheepish smile. "Over a nice dinner, maybe, or during a sunset. But standing here on the land where we will build our life together feels right." He took her hand. "Beatrice Murphy, will you marry me? Will you help me build this dream into reality? Will you polish my rough edges and stay with me through whatever comes?" Beatrice looked at the ring, at Quinton's earnest face, at the beautiful valley spread out around them, and felt absolute certainty settle over her like a warm blanket. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it. I will marry you, Quinton Kane, and I will stay. Always." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her. Then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and the horses wandered off to graze while the two humans celebrated their future with joy and laughter and tears of happiness. They were married in early March of 1877, in a simple ceremony at the boarding house with Martha Henderson as witness and the local minister officiating. Beatrice wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale green with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Quinton wore his best suit, his boots polished to a mirror shine. There were no flowers, no elaborate decorations, but when they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through all the challenges life would bring, there was not a dry eye in the room. Martha had prepared a wedding supper, and several of the townspeople who had grown to respect the young couple attended. Even some of Quinton's fellow miners showed up, bringing small gifts and heartfelt congratulations. The celebration was simple but genuine, filled with laughter and good wishes. That night, in the room that had been Beatrice's but was now theirs, Quinton carried her over the threshold with exaggerated ceremony that made her laugh. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Hello, Mrs. Kane," he said softly. "Hello, Mr. Kane," she replied, feeling the strangeness and rightness of the new name. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, nothing like the awkward encounters Beatrice had experienced with Samuel. Quinton was patient and attentive, making sure she felt cherished and desired. When they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Beatrice felt a completeness she had never known was possible. The next 6 months passed in a blur of work and planning. Quinton continued at the mine, and Beatrice continued helping Martha, but every spare moment was devoted to preparing for their move to the ranch. They purchased supplies bit by bit: tools, seeds, basic furniture, a good milk cow, chickens. Beatrice sewed curtains and quilts, while Quinton repaired and improved the cabin on their property during his days off. In August, exactly 6 months after finding the land, Quinton made the down payment and signed the papers that made the ranch theirs. The owner, an older man named Joseph Crawford who was moving back east to live with his daughter, shook Quinton's hand with a smile. "You are getting a good piece of land," he said. "Treat it right, and it will provide for you and yours for generations." "That is exactly what I intend to do," Quinton replied. They moved to the ranch on a bright September morning, their belongings loaded into a borrowed wagon. Martha cried when they said goodbye, making them promise to visit often and to send word when the baby came. "What baby?" Beatrice had asked, confused. Martha had just smiled knowingly. "The one you are going to have. Mark my words, before this time next year you will be a mother." As it turned out, Martha's prediction was remarkably accurate. By October, Beatrice knew she was pregnant, and by November, Quinton knew too, his reaction a mix of joy and protectiveness that made Beatrice laugh and cry at the same time. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Beatrice assured him. The winter was harder than the previous one, with heavy snows that sometimes trapped them in the cabin for days at a time. But Quinton had prepared well, and they had plenty of supplies. More importantly, they had each other. Those long winter evenings, sitting by the fire while snow piled up outside, were some of the happiest of Beatrice's life. They would talk for hours, read aloud from the few books they owned, make plans for the spring planting and the expansion of their herd. Quinton continued to work his claim on their property whenever weather permitted, finding enough silver to supplement their income. But his real passion was the ranch itself, the cattle they were slowly accumulating, the improvements he made to the property bit by bit. "This is what I was meant to do," he told Beatrice one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "Not digging in the dark for silver, but working this land, building something that will last, something our children and grandchildren will inherit." "Our children," Beatrice repeated, her hand on her growing belly. "It is still strange to think about. Me, a mother." "You are going to be amazing," Quinton said, kissing her temple. "I have watched how you care for the animals, how gentle and patient you are. Our baby is lucky to have you." Their son was born on a warm May evening in 1878, delivered by Martha Henderson, who had insisted on coming out to the ranch for the last month of Beatrice's pregnancy. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Quinton, pacing outside the cabin, feared he might lose them both. But Beatrice was strong, and Martha was experienced, and when the sun rose the next morning, a healthy baby boy was crying lustily in his mother's arms. They named him Samuel Joseph Kane, Samuel for Beatrice's first husband, whose death had inadvertently set her on the path to this new life, and Joseph for the kind man who had sold them the ranch. Quinton held his son with the gentle awe of a man who cannot quite believe his good fortune. "He is perfect," Quinton whispered, his eyes shining with tears, "just like his mother." "He has your nose," Beatrice said, exhausted but happy. "Poor child," Quinton joked, making both women laugh. Martha stayed for 2 more weeks, helping Beatrice recover and teaching her the basics of infant care. When she finally returned to Silver Peak, she left with promises to visit often and demands that they bring the baby to town so she could show him off. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Beatrice's days were filled with caring for Samuel, managing the household and helping Quinton with the endless work that her ranch demanded. It was hard, harder than anything she had done before, but it was also deeply satisfying. This was her home, built with her own hands alongside the man she loved, filled with the laughter of their child. Samuel grew into a robust toddler, curious and fearless, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. By the time he was 2, Beatrice was pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter, Rose Martha Kane, was born in the spring of 1880, a placid, happy baby who seemed content to watch the world with calm interest. 2 children, Quinton marveled, holding Rose while Samuel climbed over his legs like a small mountain. "We are a proper family now." "We have been a proper family since the day we married," Beatrice corrected, but she knew what he meant. The cabin, which they had expanded twice now, rang with the sounds of childhood. Laughter and tears, questions and stories, the patter of small feet. It was everything Beatrice had dreamed of and more. The ranch prospered under Quinton's careful management. Their herd grew steadily, and Quinton's reputation as an honest dealer meant they always got fair prices when it came time to sell. They hired help during the busy seasons, local men who appreciated Quinton's fairness and Beatrice's cooking. Slowly but surely, they paid down the debt on the land, and by 1882 they owned the ranch outright. To celebrate, Quinton finally built the stone house he had always dreamed of. It took 2 years of work, done mostly by his own hands with occasional help from hired laborers, but when it was finished in 1884, it was everything he had envisioned. Solid and beautiful, with a big kitchen and windows that filled the rooms with light. They moved in on their 7th wedding anniversary, and Beatrice cried with joy as she walked through rooms that still smelled of fresh plaster and new wood. "Thank you," she told Quinton that night as they lay in their new bedroom, listening to the children's soft breathing from the room next door. "For building this, for building us, for seeing me when I was lost and helping me find myself again." "I did not build you, Beatrice," Quinton said, pulling her close. "You were already strong, already remarkable. I just gave you a place where you could be yourself, but I should be thanking you. You took a rough, directionless cowboy and polished away his edges, showed him what life could be like with purpose and love. You stayed when you could have run, when any sane woman would have protected her heart. You gave me everything I ever wanted and things I did not even know to dream of." "We gave each other everything," Beatrice corrected. "That is what love is, I think. Not one person saving another, but two people choosing to build something together that neither could create alone. Over the years that followed, the Kane Ranch continued to grow and thrive. Samuel and Rose were joined by two more children, a son named Thomas in 1885 and a daughter named Grace in 1887. The house that had seemed so spacious when they first moved in became filled with the comfortable chaos of a large family. Beatrice taught her daughters to sew and cook and manage a household, but she also taught them to ride and rope and think for themselves. Quinton taught his sons to work cattle and manage land, but he also taught them to read and appreciate beauty and treat women with respect. Together, they raised children who understood the value of hard work and honest dealing, but who also knew they were deeply loved. In 1890, a man rode up to the ranch house, dusty and travel-worn. Beatrice, hanging laundry in the yard, felt her blood run cold when she recognized Gerald Cortland, the mine foreman from Virginia City she had struck with a skillet 14 years earlier. He dismounted slowly, his movements stiff with age and injury. Beatrice called for Quinton, who emerged from the barn with Samuel, now 12 and already showing signs of the man he would become. Quinton took in the situation instantly, stepping between Beatrice and the stranger with a protective stance that was unmistakable. "Can I help you?" Quinton asked, his voice level but cold. Cortland removed his hat, revealing gray hair and a face marked by hard living. "I am looking for Beatrice Murphy," he said. "I heard she might be in these parts." "Why?" Quinton asked flatly. "I owe her an apology," Cortland said, and the statement was so unexpected that both Beatrice and Quinton were momentarily speechless. "Can I speak to her if she is here?" Beatrice stepped forward, her hand finding Quinton's. "I am Beatrice Kane now," she said, "and I am listening." Cortland looked at her, really looked, and something like shame crossed his features. "I was a different man back then," he said. "Drunk most of the time, angry at the world, taking out my failures on anyone weaker than me. What I did to you, propositioned you so soon after your husband's death, it was unforgivable. I deserved that skillet to the head and worse. I have spent the last 14 years getting sober, trying to make amends where I can. I tracked you here to tell you I am sorry, truly sorry for the fear and harm I caused. I do not expect your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that you were right to run, right to fight back, and that what happened was not your fault." Beatrice stared at him, this man who had haunted her nightmares for years, who had driven her from Virginia City in fear and desperation. He looked smaller than she remembered, diminished by time and conscience. She felt Quinton's hand squeeze hers, offering support whatever she decided. "Thank you for saying that," Beatrice said finally. "It does help, knowing that you recognize how wrong it was. I forgive you, Mr. Cortland, not because you necessarily deserve it, but because I do not want to carry that weight anymore. I have a good life now, a happy life, and I do not want any bitterness from the past to taint it." Cortland's eyes filled with tears. "You are more gracious than I had any right to expect. Thank you, Mrs. Kane. I will leave you in peace now." He mounted his horse and rode away without looking back. That night, after the children were in bed, Beatrice and Quinton sat on the porch of their stone house, looking out at the land they had built together. "Are you all right?" Quinton asked. "That must have been difficult seeing him again." "It was strange," Beatrice admitted, "but also freeing. I realized that he does not have any power over me anymore. That scared girl who ran into the desert is gone. I am not running anymore. I am home." "You are home," Quinton agreed, pulling her close. "And you are safe, and you are loved, always." The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep contentment. Samuel grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch management, allowing Quinton to slow down as his body felt the effects of a lifetime of hard work. Rose married a neighboring rancher's son, a good man who adored her, and gave Beatrice and Quinton their first grandchildren. Thomas showed an unexpected talent for business and began helping manage the financial side of the ranch. Grace, the youngest, became a teacher in Silver Peak, though she came home every weekend without fail. In 1895, on their 18th wedding anniversary, Quinton surprised Beatrice by taking her back to the rise where he had proposed, the spot where their life together had truly begun. They rode out together in the early morning, just as they had so many years before, though both moved more slowly now, their bodies marked by age and hard work. "You remember what I said to you, all those years ago when you were polishing my boots?" Quinton asked as they sat on the same rocky outcrop, watching the sun rise over their valley. "You said I did good work," Beatrice replied with a smile after that. "In the cleaning room." Beatrice thought back, searching through nearly 2 decades of memories. "You said something about people being like boots, getting scuffed and worn by life, but with the right care they could be restored, made stronger for what they had been through." "I was right," Quinton said. "Look at us. 2 damaged people, both running from painful pasts, both thinking we had to face the world alone. And then we found each other, and we have spent 18 years polishing each other's rough edges, helping each other heal and grow. We have built something beautiful together, Beatrice. Not just this ranch, not just our family, but ourselves. We are better people because we chose each other." Beatrice leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the light spread across the land they loved. "Do you remember what you asked me to do? Polish your rough edges and stay." "I remember." "That was the moment I knew, I think. Not that I loved you, not yet, but that I could love you, that you were someone worth staying for, and I was right. You have been worth every moment, every challenge, every joy. I would choose you again, Quinton Kane, 1,000 times over." Quinton turned her face to his and kissed her, as sweet and full of promise as their first kiss had been all those years ago. "And I would choose you," he said, "every single time." They sat together as the sun climbed higher. 2 people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for, talking about the past and the future, about grandchildren and the changes coming to the West, about everything and nothing. And when they finally rode back to the ranch, to the house they had built and the family they had created, they rode hand in hand, just as they had faced everything else in their life together. In the years that followed, Beatrice and Quinton settled into the comfortable rhythm of grandparents and elder ranchers. They still worked, their hands never fully idle, but the backbreaking labor was left to younger generations while they focused on guidance and wisdom. Beatrice maintained her garden, which had grown over the years to include not just vegetables, but flowers that brought color and beauty to the harsh desert landscape. Quinton spent his days riding the property, checking on the cattle and the land with the eye of someone who knew every inch of his domain. By 1900, they had 6 grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch had expanded to include not just the original valley, but adjacent properties they had purchased over the years. It was a legacy built on hard work and smart decisions, on love and partnership, on 2 people who had chosen each other and never looked back. On a warm evening in June of 1905, the entire Kane family gathered at the Stone House to celebrate Beatrice and Quinton's 28th wedding anniversary. The table, which Quinton had built himself from local pine, was extended to its full length to accommodate 4 children, their spouses, and 8 grandchildren. The noise was tremendous, filled with laughter and conversation and the clatter of dishes. Beatrice stood at the head of the table, looking at the faces of the family she and Quinton had created, and felt her heart swell with gratitude. Samuel, now a husband and father himself, so serious and responsible. Rose, beautiful and kind, with her twins on her lap. Thomas, clever with numbers, explaining something to his nephew. Grace, still unmarried but content, teaching her nieces a song. And at the other end of the table, Quinton, his hair now completely silver, his face lined with age but his eyes still bright with the love and humor that had first drawn her to him. He caught her looking and raised his glass. "To my wife," he said, his voice carrying over the family chatter. "Who saw a rough cowboy with more dreams than sense and decided to take a chance. Who polished away my rough edges and stayed, even when things were hard. Who gave me everything I have that matters. To Beatrice. To Beatrice," the family echoed, raising their glasses. Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "And to Quinton," she replied, "who saw a frightened widow running from her past and offered her a future. Who built this house, this ranch, this family with his own 2 hands and never asked for thanks. Who loves without reservation and gives without counting the cost. To my husband. To Quinton," they chorused. After dinner, when the children were playing in the yard and the adults were sitting on the porch enjoying the cool evening air, Samuel approached his parents with a serious expression. "Father, Mother," he said, "I have been thinking about the future of the ranch. You have both worked so hard for so many years, and I think it is time you had some rest. Thomas and I have discussed it, and we would like to take over the day-to-day operations completely. You built this place, but we want to maintain it, expand it, ensure it continues for generations. All we ask is your guidance and blessing." Quinton and Beatrice exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that came from decades of partnership. They both knew this day had been coming, that their children were ready to step fully into leadership. It was both sad and deeply satisfying, the natural progression of a life well lived. "You have our blessing," Quinton said, shaking his son's hand. "You and Thomas have proven yourselves more than capable. Your mother and I will help however we can, but the ranch is yours now. Treat it well." "We will," Samuel promised. "We learned from the best." And so Beatrice and Quinton entered the final chapter of their lives, stepping back from active management, but remaining the heart of the family. They spent their days together, riding out to their favorite spots, tending Beatrice's garden, playing with grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had worked hard for so many years, and now they savored the fruits of that labor. In the summer of 1910, Quinton fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, progressed to difficulty breathing, and eventually left him weak and bedridden. The doctor from Silver Peak came out to examine him and took Beatrice aside with grave eyes. "His lungs are damaged," the doctor said gently. "Probably from all those years working in the mines before you married. I am sorry, Mrs. Kane. There is not much I can do. Keep him comfortable and make the most of the time you have left." Beatrice refused to cry in front of the doctor, waiting until he had left before allowing herself to break down. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and went to her husband's side. If their time together was limited, she would not waste a moment of it on grief. There would be time enough for tears later. She moved a chair next to the bed and took Quinton's hand. "The doctor says your lungs are bad," she said, because they had never lied to each other and she would not start now. "He does not think you have much time." Quinton managed a weak smile. "I am not surprised. I have been feeling it for a while now. I am sorry, my love. I wanted more years with you." "We have had 33 years, Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. 33 wonderful years that I would not trade for anything. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me myself. That is more than most people get in a lifetime." "I did not give you those things," Quinton said, squeezing her hand with what strength he had left. "We built them together." "That is what I am most proud of, Beatrice. Not the ranch, not the success, but the life we created together. The partnership we forged. You are the best decision I ever made." They talked through the day and into the night, reminiscing about their years together, laughing over old memories and crying over the approaching goodbye. The children came in shifts, saying their farewells, but mostly it was just Beatrice and Quinton, as it had been in the beginning. In the early hours of the morning, with the first light of dawn just beginning to show in the east, Quinton's breathing changed. Beatrice, who had been dozing in her chair, immediately woke and moved closer. "I am here," she said, taking his hand. "I am right here, my love." Quinton's eyes opened, focusing on her face with effort. "Beatrice," he whispered. "My beautiful Beatrice, thank you for polishing my rough edges. Thank you for staying." "Always," she said, kissing his forehead. "I will always stay, and when my time comes I will find you again. That is a promise." Quinton smiled, and then he closed his eyes and slipped away, as peacefully as falling asleep. Beatrice held his hand for a long time after, feeling the warmth slowly fade, memorizing every detail of his face. Her partner, her love, her home. The funeral was held 3 days later, attended by what seemed like half of Nevada. Quinton had been respected and admired throughout the territory, known for his honesty and fairness, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. But Beatrice barely noticed them. She stood at the graveside, flanked by her children and surrounded by her grandchildren, and said goodbye to the man who had given her everything. The months that followed were the hardest of Beatrice's life, harder even than when her parents had died or when she had fled Virginia City. This grief was deeper, more all-encompassing, because she was not just mourning a person but a way of life, a partnership that had defined her for more than 3 decades. The house felt empty without Quinton's presence. The days felt purposeless without him to share them with. But she had promised him she would stay, and Beatrice Kane kept her promises. She threw herself into the work of the ranch, taking on responsibilities she had let go of in recent years. She spent time with each of her grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew the man he had been. She maintained the garden, kept the house exactly as Quinton had left it, and found small ways to honor his memory every day. Gradually, the sharp edge of grief dulled into something more manageable, a constant ache rather than an acute pain. Beatrice found that she could smile again when thinking of Quinton, could remember their life together with joy rather than just sorrow. She knew he would want her to be happy, to live fully for whatever time she had left. On what would have been their 35th wedding anniversary, Beatrice rode out to the rise where Quinton had proposed, where they had sat together so many times over the years. She dismounted carefully, her 70-year-old body not as nimble as it once was, and sat on the familiar rock outcrop. "Hello, my love," she said to the wind, to the valley, to the memory of the man who had transformed her life. "I miss you every day, but I am still here. Still staying, like I promised. The ranch is doing well. Samuel and Thomas are managing it beautifully, making improvements you would be proud of. Rose's twins are about to give us great-grandchildren, can you imagine? And Grace, she finally met someone, a nice man who teaches at the school with her. I think you would approve." She sat there for a long time, watching the sun move across the sky, feeling connected to Quinton in a way that transcended death. He was in this land they had worked together, in the house they had built, in the children they had raised, in every good thing in her life. Death might have taken his physical presence, but it could not take what they had created together. Beatrice lived for another 7 years. active and engaged in the family business until the very end. She saw the ranch continue to prosper, saw her grandchildren marry and have children of their own, saw the 20th century bring changes to the West that she never could have imagined when she first arrived in Silver Peak. On a warm September evening in 1917, surrounded by 4 generations of the family she and Quinton had created, Beatrice Kane passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 77 years old and had lived a full, rich life that had exceeded her wildest dreams. They buried her next to Quinton on a hillside overlooking the valley, beneath a large oak tree that had been nothing but a sapling when they first bought the ranch. The entire family gathered for the funeral, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them testimony to the love story that had begun more than 40 years earlier with a widow polishing a cowboy's boots. Samuel, now a grandfather himself, stood at his mother's grave and told the story for the assembled family, making sure the youngest generation understood where they came from. "My mother came to Silver Peak with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of fear," he said. "She was running from a past that had been hard and painful, looking for nothing more than survival. And then she met my father, a cowboy with more dreams than money, and somehow they found in each other everything they needed. He asked her to polish his rough edges and stay, and she did. She stayed through hard times and good times, through poverty and prosperity, through raising 4 children and building a ranch from nothing. She stayed through illness and grief and loss, and now she has gone to be with him again, wherever he is. If there is any justice in the universe, they are together now, riding through green valleys under endless skies, still polishing each other's rough edges, still choosing each other every day." The family stood together as the sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and remembered 2 people who had loved deeply and well, who had built something lasting from nothing but hope and hard work and devotion. The ranch would continue. Their descendants would carry on their legacy, but the love story of Beatrice and Quinton Kane would become the foundation on which generations were built. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from taking chances on each other, from staying when it would be easier to run, from polishing each other's rough edges and choosing love even when it seems impossible. And in the years that followed, when new Kane children would ask about the couple in the old photographs hanging in the stone house, the ones showing a serious-looking man and a gentle-faced woman standing in front of a small cabin, their descendants would tell the story of how Beatrice was polishing Quinton's boots one day at a boarding house in Silver Peak, and how that simple act of service had led to a courtship, a marriage, a ranch, and a dynasty. They would tell how Quinton had seen past the frightened widow to the strong woman beneath, and how Beatrice had seen past the rough cowboy to the devoted partner waiting to emerge. They would tell of a love that had started fast but lasted forever, that had burned bright and true through decades of challenges and changes. And they would remember most of all the words that had started it all, the request that had become a promise that had become a life. "Polish my rough edges and stay." Beatrice had done both, and in doing so, had created a legacy that would endure for generations, built on the foundation of 2 people who had chosen love when the world expected them to choose survival, who had chosen each other when logic suggested they should protect their hearts, who had chosen to stay when running would have been easier. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, as big and dramatic and beautiful as the land itself, and it would be told and retold as long as the Kane name endured.